Good afternoon. Wow. So technology has transformed any number of industries over the last several decades. If you go back to 1995, the 5 largest record labels had 83% of the profits. Those record companies chose which artists got identified, they made the records, they packaged them, they distributed them, they owned the entire process. Because of technology, artists now get found on YouTube. Distribution happens on Amazon. New technologies have allowed peer-to-peer file sharing, iTunes, Pandora, Spotify, all these things to transform the record industry to the point where now only 20% of the profits are owned by the top 5 record labels. We see it with Airbnb and other companies. One area where technology has been a little bit slower to transform the world is in politics. We're starting to see it, those of you who are involved with the Pork Busters effort with earmark reform about 10 years ago, saw the ability of bloggers all around the country to go in, look at a bill, find things like the Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska, the rainforest in Iowa, the Teapot Museum in North Carolina, and ultimately, because of citizen activism and because of information that was put up on the internet, the earmark moratorium was put into place. We see it with the Farm Bill, where citizens all across the country can find out that 80% of a so-called Farm Bill is actually food stamps, with transportation spending. Technology is transforming politics just a little bit slower than it's transforming the taxi industry. One area where we see leadership in terms of transparency and putting information is Ohio, and it's because of the efforts of our speaker today. Josh Mandel was sworn in for his second term as the 48th treasurer of the state of Ohio on January 12, 2015. A Marine Corps veteran and a former member of Ohio's General Assembly, Treasurer Mandel has made improving the state's transparency efforts a core component of his agenda for fiscal responsibility. This year, as part of his office's ongoing transparency project, Treasurer Mandel launched an online checkbook, allowing taxpayers easy access to information on the state's expenses, including a listing of Ohio's highest-paid contractors and agency-level spending data broken down to the line item. In recognition of his leadership, he has been named Legislative Rookie of the Year by the nonpartisan Columbus Monthly magazine and Watchdog of the Treasury by the United Conservatives Ohio. Please join me in welcoming Josh Mandel to Heritage.
Mike, thank you for having me here, and appreciate everyone at Heritage for inviting me to speak. What I thought I'd do is just take this thing for a spin and show you how it works, tell you what we're trying to do throughout the country, and then be glad to open up to any questions you might have. Little background on why I'm here and what we've done with OhioCheckbook.com. I identified when I first came in as state treasurer a problem in our state government that everyday taxpayers couldn't see how money was being spent. Our public records process throughout the state oftentimes delivered to everyday citizens roadblocks and obstacles. In addition to that, there were a lot of PDFs online, but nothing that was really accessible, searchable, navigable by everyday citizens. And so we decided to do something about it. We were approached by a state legislator from the Cleveland area who was also interested in the same topic, and we decided to ask the legislature to make me put the state's checkbook online. We asked them to introduce a bill that would compel the treasurer of the state of Ohio to take every single penny of state spending and put it on the internet. Everything from $2 for a pack of pencils to millions of dollars for road contracts and everything in between. This bill was introduced in May of 2013. And we thought it would pass pretty quickly. We thought it was sort of like baseball, motherhood, apple pie. Everyone would be for it, Democrats and Republicans. And what we found along the way was that there were a lot of people in political office and bureaucrats in the bowels of government who publicly, when asked, said good things, and privately, when they bumped into me in the State House, said, "Hey, why are you doing this? You're going to make us look bad." And my response to that was pretty simple. This information, this money belongs to the people, and they have a right to know how the money's being spent. So this bill was introduced in May of 2013. We couldn't get it passed out of the state House of Representatives until June of 2014. It passed at 1 in the morning in June of 2014 as the last bill that passed before the State House recessed. And then last year, in the fall of 2014, it died in the state Senate. We got a sense, once the bill was introduced, that there was going to be more and more opposition than we initially thought. So in the treasurer's office, we started dual tracking it. We started developing OhioCheckbook.com at the same time that our legislative team was trying to get the bill passed in the legislature. It took us over a year to develop this. Last summer, we were getting close to being done, and some people on my staff came to me and said, hey, we think we're close. And I said, all right, now that we're close, let's go hire someone to try and break it. So we hired a private sector company to try to penetrate it and break it and compromise it, tried to learn some lessons from the Obamacare launch. And we then got close to, probably September, October of last year, and some folks around me said, hey, why don't you launch it now? This probably wouldn't hurt for re-election efforts, and this would be a good time to launch it. And I said, you know what? Let's wait till after the re-election. Let's launch it in December so no one could ever make the accusation that it was done for political reasons, because politics has nothing to do with this. We're doing it because we think it's a great service to taxpayers throughout the state. So we waited till December after it was clear that the legislation was going to die and the legislature wouldn't pass it, and we decided just to do it on our own. And so December 2nd of last year, we launched ohiocheckbook.com. This includes $400 billion of state spending. Everything, as I mentioned, from small expenditures like office supplies up to large expenditures like consulting contracts, legal contracts, road expenditures, and pretty much everything in between. One of the things that I've done recently is realize that local governments can use this as a tool as well. So about 3 weeks ago, I sent a letter to 18,000 city councilmen, school board members, county commissioners, folks who sit on the boards of library districts and sewer districts, and said, hey, we just put $400 billion of spending online from the state of Ohio. How about you guys do the same thing at the local level? So we, in about 2 to 3 weeks now, have already received 300 communications from city councilmen, mayors, county commissioners that said, you know what, we want to raise our hand and be first, which was pleasantly surprising to us. We didn't really know how folks would respond. There's a lot of boss hog type mayors out there who probably are not big fans of having their information online, but we've been pleasantly surprised. And the nice thing is, about 2 weeks ago, I stood in the courthouse of Mahoning County, Ohio. I don't know if anyone here knows Mahoning County, but that's Youngstown. And unfortunately, the Youngstown area over the past few decades has probably been one of the parts of Ohio that, again, unfortunately, has been disturbed and disrupted by a lot of corruption. And I stood there as a conservative Republican state treasurer with 3 Democratic county commissioners and announced that Mahoning County, Ohio was going to be the first county in the state to put their checkbook online. Next week, I'm going to be in Lorain County, standing there again with 3 Democrat county commissioners, announcing that Lorain County is the second county. This is a county that's just to the west of Cuyahoga County, which is the Cleveland area. Pretty soon, we're going to be working with large urban school districts as well to get their checkbooks online. And my ultimate goal here is to set off a national race for transparency. That if we in the state of Ohio, in places like Youngstown and Toledo and small towns like Wapakoneta and Portsmouth, if we can inspire local government leaders to follow what we've done at the state level, I think we can inspire governors and state treasurers and legislators in other states to do the same thing. We've already been contacted by 7 or 8 officials in other states around the country, and my ultimate vision here is set off this national race for transparency, create this army of citizen watchdogs who have the power to hold public officials accountable. And once we've been successful in Ohio, once we've then built this critical mass around the country, we can then march here to Washington and start putting more and more pressure on congressmen, on the White House to shine more sunlight on federal spending as well. This whole concept, this whole idea is based in the principles that James Madison felt very strongly about, not only individual liberty, but the importance of individuals having access to information, that one of the best ways we can hold public officials accountable is by having the knowledge and the information to do so. I believe very strongly in the concept that when government is big, the people are small. But conversely, when we can make government small, we can make people big. And that's what we're trying to do here, limit the size and scope of government and really empower and make large individuals in places like Columbus, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, Cincinnati, and small towns throughout our state. So let me take this for a spin, and what I thought I'd do is allow you guys to just shout out information if you want, just to show you this is not pre-programmed or anything like that. So You can search in this database in a lot of different ways. You can search by office, so governor's office, state treasurer's office, the EPA, Department of Insurance, Department of Health, Education, so on and so forth. You can also search by category of spending if you wanted to look at spending in the area of office equipment, or spending in the area of legal expenses, or spending in the area of road expenditures. In addition to that, you can also search by vendor. So if you're an enterprising reporter or you're a citizen watchdog and you think that ABC Construction or XYZ Consulting in Columbus, Ohio, or Toledo or Akron is up to no good, you can actually do a search of certain vendors in this database as well. We think that not only is this a great tool for taxpayers, but we also think ultimately it'll be a great tool for better decision making and changing behavior in government. We think it could be used by decision makers for business analytics and business intelligence, that if they see a certain vendor is being used in other parts of state government or local government, they can learn from that information. They can see repetitive patterns and really work with other agencies to get better pricing from vendors and also remove duplication in purchasing both at the state level and the local level. I also personally believe it's something that can take folks who are cynical about our system and for the first time in some people's lifetime, take the powerless and make them powerful. And I've been at the drugstore, the grocery store, I've been out to dinner with my family, and people come up to me and said, I've been cynical forever, and this is one of the first times in my life when I really feel like I have the power to hold public officials accountable. And so we're just getting started, and we're proud of what we're doing. And again, let me just ask for a volunteer from the audience to shout out a company, a type of spending, a state agency, and we'll show you how this thing works.
Do the treasurer's office.
All right. All right, so let's say you want to look at what we've spent on, for instance, let's say office equipment. That's equipment in general. This is office equipment here. So this has been last year. That's how much was spent on office equipment. Is that a lot or a little compared to other agencies? We'll take a look at that in a second, but scroll down, Seth. These are the expenditures. Looks like fiscal year 2014, we made 3 expenditures for office equipment. Click on one of those to show the check. And this is the actual check. So you see here this check, there's actually 112 million of these individual checks on here. Each check has 36 pieces of information. So it says the agency that expended the dollars. So you see the state agency. You see the date it was expended, so February 28th, 2014. You see the check number. You see the payee, Innovative Hardware. You see the amount. This was for $3,200. And let's say you wanted to know more. We actually put the contact information for every state agency. So here you have an email address, phone number, and address for my office. So if you're Joe Sixpack or Jane Sixpack and you don't really know who the person to contact is at the EPA or the Department of Insurance, it's right there at your fingertips if you want to ask questions. Let's say you want to take this and share it on Facebook or Twitter or other social media. You can share it via social media as well. Let's say you wanted to dig a little deeper and know where in the state budget this come from, when the money was actually appropriated, what was the appropriation line item. You can click where the money's coming from, and there's a line here that goes to appropriation line item. Let's zoom back out, Seth. So you see $27,000 here. What's that mean in context? What does that mean compared to other state agencies? So we created a compare function where you can compare it to other state agencies. So you guys want to just shout out some agencies, and we'll compare them to other state agencies. All right, education. All right, why don't you pick a few more, Seth? Just pick some random ones. All right. Click compare. So this gives us, over the past year, where we fit in, so compared to other agencies. So looks like we might be the smallest. This is the Treasurer's Office. Looks like the largest here, that big outlier is the Department of Public Safety. This though, so they spent $3.6 million last year on office equipment. Our office spent $27,000, so it gives you, gives you a little context. But let's say you want to go back and have a little more context back through time. You can click year to year, and this gives you a 7-year outlook back to fiscal year 2008. We include in this database what we call dynamic charting, where every single chart you see on here, whether it's a bar chart or a pie chart, it's all live. And so every one of these charts is live. So let's say fiscal year, I'm going to pick one, Seth, 2013. You can click on this outlier, and then we can go dig into that specific agency and see what that agency in that specific year, what they're spending. You want to click on yep, there you go. You can sort by amount. Why don't you pick the Pitney Bowes there? And again, you can, it should pull up the check. The internet connection in here, from what I heard, is good but not great, and so hopefully it'll come up. Bottom line, it would pull up that check for Pitney Bowes the same way we just pulled up that check. There you go for for the treasurer's office. So let's search a different way. Seth, go back to the main screen. Let's say you wanted to look at let's say KPMG. So you want to know, is KPMG doing business with the state of Ohio? You can search by vendor. This gives you a picture of over the past 4 years, the business they've done with the state. Why don't you click 2011, Seth? Looks like it's the largest. So this gives a month by month. You can then click all the fiscal year 2011 transactions, and it'll bring up every transaction in fiscal year 11 that KPMG did with the state of Ohio. You could sort by agency if you want to see who they're doing business with. You can sort it by agency. It looks like most of the work they're doing, in our state at least, was with the Department of Commerce. We're not going to export this now, but you can see there's a little icon up there that says export. So if you wanted to, if you're an investigative reporter or citizen watchdog and you wanted to do some pattern analysis, you can export it into an Excel spreadsheet and dig a little deeper. Yes?
Is there any way to get more context on what type of office equipment was purchased and how many people work in a particular department, so we have some context? Like at the federal level, you often see at the end of the year a lot of office equipment gets purchased for the sole reason of just spending end of year funds, and without the proper context, you can't, it's like they bought 1 million pens, but they only have 200 people. Does this make sense?
Right. So it's a good question. This specific database does not include the amount of employees per agency. I think that's a good suggestion. This was our first shot out was doing this, and we've been trying to gather good suggestions for the 2.0 version. And so I think some of my staff's here in the room, they'll take note of that because I think that's a very good idea for our next iteration of this to actually put the size of the agencies and probably in general, what the patterns are in respect to those specific types of spending. You can't see the budgets. So we don't have the state employees here, but you do see, when we show you the pie charts, you can see the total budget. So Seth, go type in there a state agency, EPA or whomever. So if you look at the state EPA, you can see, this was their fiscal 14 budget was about $176 million. And so you do have that kind of context. You can see the actual overhead budget for each agency, and you can see the equipment or travel budget. A lot of reporters back in Ohio have been doing stories on travel. There was a TV reporter in Dayton who did one, and that's some of the stuff that probably is more interesting to a lot of folks. And part of what I'm trying to do here is change behavior. So you take travel, for instance. We want to put public officials on notice that we, the people, are watching. And we want to say to them, by virtue of having all this information online, you're now going to have a lot more eyeballs on your spending. So we'd like to make both politicians and bureaucrats think twice before they go to a conference in Hawaii when they could have gone to a conference in Cincinnati, or before they stay at the Ritz-Carlton on taxpayer dime when they could have stayed at the Holiday Inn. And one might say, hey, Josh, I think no one's really going to Hawaii for conferences, but I can tell you, 2 years ago, we had a school bus driver who sits on the School Employee Retirement System Board. She's a fiduciary board member on the pension board. And the Columbus Dispatch and the Dayton Daily News, a reporter named Laura Bischoff there, did many, many stories on this, that this school bus driver, who's supposed to be there making good decisions on behalf of cafeteria workers and school bus drivers and janitors in the schools, was emphatic that the only place she can get her continuing education was at this conference in Hawaii. I kid you not. And so fortunately, it was really through media pressure. It was really through repetitive articles, that appeared in the Columbus Dispatch and Dayton Daily News that she saw the light. And I think the other board members on the board ultimately voted down the funding for the trip. Another good example, there's a gentleman who used to be the superintendent of the Educational Service Center in the Columbus area in central Ohio. This guy was using tax money, staying at the Broadmoor. He was buying booze, basically going out partying with money that was supposed to be used to educate children. Columbus Dispatch did an investigative report, exposed it, and I think this guy is now being definitely investigated and possibly prosecuted. And so my hope is that this will be a deterrent to behavior like that, and it'll really make public officials think twice before they waste taxpayer money or, even worse, defraud the citizens. Sir?
The payroll expenses be pulled out?
Good question. So the payroll expenses on here are broad, but we do have, so it's not each individual employee. However, on another section on our website, we have every employee's salary. So Seth, can you go to the main website? So if you go to our main website, we have every teacher, school employee, and state employee's salary on here. Let's just make up a name like Mary Smith. There's probably a Mary Smith that works in the state of Ohio. So here's a bunch of Smiths. You can just click on one of them. So, let's say this lady, Vicki Gordon Smith, works at the Office of Developmental Disabilities. Her title, job description is Fiscal Specialist 1. Last year she made $47,000, and it says what the hourly rate broken down is and if she earned any overtime. And so you have this for every state employee and every teacher and every school employee as well. Ultimately, where I'd like to get is to integrate this into the ohiocheckbook.com, and so it's all in one place, like a one-stop shop. Here's the main challenge we have at the local level. So when we built this for the state of Ohio, what powers it behind it, what feeds the information into the database is a uniform accounting network. So in the state of Ohio, we have an accounting network called the Ohio Administrative Knowledge System, which is a uniform accounting network. So if we buy office supplies in our office, or the governor buys office supplies, or Department of Safety or EPA, it gets classified in the same way. Same thing for consulting, accounting expenses, legal expenses, pavement, what have you. 3,900 local governments in this state. Some of the larger, more advanced local governments like Franklin County or the city of Columbus may be on more advanced accounting systems. A lot of the smaller townships with 100, 200 people are still doing some of their accounting on legal pads. And so that's part of our challenge, is taking 3,900 local governments and getting that information, integrating it into one uniform system that can be digested and presented in one format. So we are in the process right now of figuring out how that's going to work. It's laborious and time-consuming. The direction I've given to my staff is I'd rather it be done accurately and well rather than quickly. And the last thing we want to do is rush to get all the local information online and there be mistakes. And so as state treasurer, we have access to all the state information. So when I built ohiocheckbook.com, we in the state treasurer's office have access to the information. Can you go back to the checkbook? With the local governments, we don't have access. And so I'd be open to any suggestions you have onto how to convince the local governments to volunteer and do the right thing. We are approaching it with sugar instead of spice. We're approaching it in a friendly, cooperative manner. And so I sent this letter to these 3,900 local governments, as I mentioned, and basically said to them, listen, we want to partner with you. We want to offer this as a service. This is a great service for your taxpayers. Give us a call, send us an email if you're interested. And so that those 300 local governments that I mentioned, those were the 300 that as of yesterday had responded and said, hey, we're interested. So that leaves about 3,600 out there. What I've said to my staff is we don't need to get to 3,900 to get to 3,900. We need to get to a critical mass to get to 3,900. We need to get to that tipping point, because once we reach that tipping point, it's going to be uncomfortable for the other remaining local governments to not be there. Once you're a city or a county or a school district and you're surrounded by other schools or cities or counties that already have their information online, citizens, taxpayers are going to start asking, what do you have to hide? And interestingly enough, I think one of our most critical partners in all of this is the media, because the media is going to start asking, what do you have to hide as well? And we've had a lot of positive relationships with folks in the media over this, and a lot of both journalists who are reporters, but also folks on the editorial opinion side, without our prompting over the past few weeks, have done columns and editorials encouraging their local governments to roger up and raise their right hand and participate in this process. So it's been pleasantly surprising. I thought when I sent this letter to the local governments and the school districts, I was basically going to get the Heisman, and it's been pleasantly surprising. We really had, I would say, more and more local governments open to it than we thought. And as I mentioned, as a conservative, it's been refreshing to see folks on the other side of the aisle raise their hand and say, we'd like to partner with you. And this is one of those issues that is just not partisan. It's one of those issues that I think can bring folks together across the spectrum to make government smaller and limited in size and scope, and really hold politicians accountable for the spending decisions they're making.
Are there any
Please.
sort of expenses that are exempt from disclosure? And then also, have you found any sort of like loopholes that allow people to say, put expenses on a credit card instead of cutting a check to, so they can report to you, but then kind of hide what they're doing?
Latter question, this includes credit card and check expenditures. And so when you see that check up there that we showed you, some of those checks are actually credit card expenditures. We just decided to present them graphically as a check because we thought that was the easiest way to understand it. But those checks, as I mentioned, there's 112 million of those individual checks, and they represent both electronic transactions as well as actual checks that were expended. First part about your question is one of the things we spend a lot of time on in our office. So each state in the nation defines confidential personal information in a different way. I'll give you some examples. Let's say there's a person who's a victim of rape and they're receiving a payout from a victim's assistance fund. And that person's name is not a matter of public record in Ohio public records law. Or if there's an undercover agent at the Bureau of Criminal Investigation that's doing undercover drug stings, that person's name on a check is not a matter of public record. So there are exemptions to public record law in Ohio, and those are some of them. And so my staff had to work with some of the other agencies and the Attorney General's office to ensure that we eliminated all of those confidential personal pieces of information from exposure on this website. So we're confident that we did that. We might have thrown some of the, we might have been a little too restrictive. The direction I gave my staff was to err on the side of caution, because the last thing we wanted to do was make a mistake in that regard. We actually hired a law firm who specializes in technology and the law to present a formula and a plan for us. And then we also worked with our state attorney general's office to sort of double check the work. So we have not had any problems or issues in that regard. Frankly, we have not had any problems or issues with inaccurate information either. We have not had any complaints about inaccurate information. I thought there was going to be a ton, because the information in here is only as good as the fiscal clerk who entered it in that agency. So you're probably talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of fiscal clerks who entered all this information over the past 7 years. But thus far, we have not had any reports of inaccurate information. And if we do get those reports, we'll just advise the agency and they'll correct it in the proper accounting network. One of the other features we built on here, if you scroll down, is just some highlights of highest paid companies and largest expense types. So you see the largest expense types here, medical services is the first one, so on and so forth. The highest paid companies are by and large in the healthcare field and the construction field. So why don't you click on Shelley and Sands? So this is a construction company that does a lot of construction work, and you could actually see what they've done over the past year. Let's click on 2014. Click on July. A lot of summer construction goes on around the state, and you can actually see every single check. And just click on one of those checks for the folks that just walked in. And so this will have every single highway construction check in the state of Ohio. Let's say you want to, again, dig deeper where the money's coming from. You can click where the money's coming from, and you can see this actually comes from highway construction, from federal funds. We are one of those states that has a 21-year-old drinking age, not an 18-year-old drinking age. And so we get federal highway funding. Bad joke. We also created on here breadcrumbs. So if you want to go back into the if you want to research the derivation of the dollars, and you want to sort of zoom out, these breadcrumbs on the bottom of the check are all live, and so you see this comes from the highway operating fund, then safety, so on and so forth. So you can actually zoom out. So if you want to click one of those, Seth, you can zoom out and actually see the every check in that fund. One of my pet peeves in government is crony capitalism and corporate welfare. And I know there's a lot of people in this room who share my passion in trying to root it out. And so one of the interesting components of this is actually looking in the Department of Economic Development. Right now it's called Developmental Services Agency, and seeing how tax money is being redistributed, how wealth is being redistributed to pick winners and losers in the marketplace. And so, Seth, can you pull up that agency, and we'll just look at one of the funds. I think personally this is one of the more interesting parts of it, where you can actually see the different grants that are given out to companies throughout the state. Seth, I'll tell you a different way you can get to it. Just go to search, just type in Frito-Lay. There you go. Let's go to 2014. These aren't the large ones. Why don't you, while I'm talking, you can search on there and try to find Whirlpool, Frito-Lay. Those are probably some of the companies. So he'll bring that up while we're talking, but you can actually see every single economic development dollar that was spent in the state of Ohio and ask questions about it.
Josh, what were some of the interests that, so you said it's not a partisan issue, but there were plenty of people opposed to it, and kind of other than, kind of corrupt county commissioner, were big companies kind of behind the scenes trying to stop this? Were there, how did that kind of play through?
Good question. We haven't had too many companies or state vendors that have gone after me or tried to stop it. We have not, as you all know, oftentimes in the legislative process, those opposed to something, especially on the corporate lobbying side, they try to do it, quickly in the darkness of night. And so it's possible that we have not been able to track some of that down. But I would say that it's been mostly public officials that have tried to stop it, both sides of the aisle. We've had people you've heard of in high places in the Ohio government try to throw marbles under my feet and stop this thing from happening. When the bill was passed out of the State House of Representatives last year, before it died in the Senate, it passed overwhelmingly, because we knew once we got it to the floor, it passed. I think there was only 7 or 8 people that voted against it. One of the guys was the outgoing Democratic Party chairman. Here's an interesting story to tell. So when I was running for state treasurer in 2010, I ran against a guy named Kevin Boyce, who was a sitting state treasurer. He was formerly a Columbus City councilman, and we had a pretty, I'd say, intense, passionate campaign. And there was no love lost between us during the campaign. After the campaign, we got together at Bob Evans and broke bread, and we have a good relationship now. But he's a very good person, thoughtful person, but partisan Democrat. He, last week, when this bill came back up on the floor of the State House of Representatives, he stood up there and was one of the main proponents calling for the passage of this bill. And the bill ended up passing unanimously, and I give him credit. I think he's one of the main reasons the bill passed unanimously, because I think, but for him speaking up, it would not have passed with every Democrat in the State House voting. And so, think about it, 4 or 5 years ago, these two guys are beating each other up in a pretty heated state treasurer campaign. 5 years later, he's on the floor of that State House Representative speaking in support of this bill. So it's one of those interesting issues, transparency, that can really bring folks together across lines. So Development Services Agency, it's an economic development styled office in state government. This is made to the order of Whirlpool Corporation. This is an economic development grant in the amount of $178,000. Let's say you want to zoom out a little and let's go to industrial training grants. See who else is in the state getting grants like this. You'll be able to see a list of all the different companies in the state. Can you search by amount? So this is highest to lowest. You see, Cooper Tire, Whirlpool, Libby Glass, Rolls-Royce, Alcoa, so on, so on, and so forth. And so I think for citizen watchdogs and also for enterprising journalists, this component's a great tool to actually say, is this a good use of tax money? To ask that question. Again, that's one of my... I'm a strong believer in the free enterprise system, and I think that consumers should pick winners and losers in the marketplace, not government. This is one of those areas where we can help everyday citizens ask questions and have access to the information and really follow this tax money. Yep, 1, 2, 3.
Something like that, is there a way to link back into the purpose of the grant, whether or not they created jobs or trained anyone for their jobs? Because we talked about this a little bit before when you were very kind to come to breakfast with us, but what else can you find out about this? Because I know everybody in the room has accomplished corporate welfare, but if you were someone saying, here's why this doesn't work, or here's why these large companies would they would do this themselves, are they training people to work in their own companies?
Right.
Training people for other jobs? What else can you find out about the program?
It's a good question. So let's click on Rolls-Royce, for instance. So one of the reasons in Ohio public records requests often get rejected is there's an exemption in Ohio public records law called the overly broad exemption. And journalists, bang their head against the wall, and interested citizens bang their head against the wall getting rejected on public records requests based on this exemption, overly broad. And so to answer your question, right now on this website, we do not have the information that's attached to it as far as how many jobs were created or what was the what happened after after the grant was given. However, what we do have here is enough information for you to pinpoint that public records request. So in the past, let's say like last year you're a journalist and you work for the Columbus Dispatch or the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and you wanted to know any economic development grant that was given to Rolls-Royce. You'd have to do a public records request of the State Department of Economic Development, maybe some other agencies, and chances are that first response would have been, sorry, your request is overly broad. Now, you can really pinpoint that request. You can say, hey, I saw that on March 1st, 2010, check number this, in this amount, from this part of your budget, you expended this check. I'd like to see all the documents related to that actual expenditure. And so it can really help you pinpoint public records requests, FOIA requests, to get to the information. And as I mentioned, we put the contact person at the agency. So this guy, John Cunningham, probably doesn't like me too much, but his email and phone number is there. And for every agency in state government, you can make a public records request. The information is right there. You had a question?
I had a similar question, how you can get access to the contracts for which.
Right. At this point in time, so we've sort of talked about that. Unfortunately, a lot of these contracts are still on paper. They're not PDF. So the process would have to be, we'd have to go to every agency, get every contract, get it into an electronic format, and then we'd probably have to have like elves matching it to each individual check. So we just don't have the time and the resources in our office to do that. At some point in time, we might be able to get that done, but at this point in time, we just don't have the bodies or the resources to do it. But in an ideal world, that's what you'd like here. I agree. It probably might be for like the 3.0 version.
Yeah, if you're looking for an example, research grants at the federal level,
Mm-hmm.
you can see the grant request, the approval, and then the amount.
It's a good idea to rather than hitting a home run, maybe try to do it single or a double and reach out to specific agencies. So for instance, we've started by reaching out to this agency and said, hey, we'd like all the documents for these economic development grants. That might be a good place to start rather than every contract in state government. As I mentioned, I have staff in the room taking notes. That's a really good idea, and maybe we'll try that.
Let's do one more question.
Yeah, is there a question in the back? I feel like someone back there.
Yeah, I
had-
mean, so I think this is a great tool, and congratulations on doing this. I wish the federal government did something like this. One thing I wonder about is when you talk about development grants and cronyism. I just searched on my phone here, for Whirlpool, which was a recipient of some of this money, and they're clearly a registered lobbyist. And so, I think another idea might be if somehow you can kind of check, at least for entities like this development services company, which may be giving a lot of crony grants away, to see kind of what's the lobbying of the recipient, and be able to tell, look, you get what you pay for.
That's a great idea. So I'm leaving here with like 3 great ideas. So part of my wanting to come to the Heritage Foundation, this building and this institution that has such a great tradition of conservative thought, was to leave with good ideas. And so now I'm leaving with 3, and that's an easier one because we already have we have this thing called the Joint Legislative Ethics Committee, JLEC, that actually posts every company, every lobbyist. I think it's similar to the federal level. And so that's probably not that heavy of a lift to actually have that information here, or at the very least a link to it. Listen, I'm not going anywhere, so I'm going to hang out here after. So any of you who want to have ideas or ask questions, please feel free. Give me a call at the office as well. 2 asks for everyone in the room. One is, if any of you have family or friends in Ohio who sit on local school boards, city councils, county commissions, townships, anything like that, if you're willing to make introductions to them and explain to them, we're not trying to make them look bad. We'd like to form a partnership to get their finances online. We'd like those introductions. It's one thing for me to cold call over them to get a letter, but if there's that third-party credibility where someone they trust is making the introduction, that we believe is a force multiplier. And so anyone who's got relationships in Ohio, please let us know. Secondly, if you have relationships with governors, state treasurers, and legislators in other states that you think would be interested in bringing it to your home states, we're glad to work with them. As I mentioned, we're already in contact with 7 or 8 states to help other states do the same thing. We don't have pride in ownership or authorship. We just want to help shine more sunlight on spending all across the country, and so we're glad to help in that regard as well. I guess one third thing would be, this is only useful if people know about it. And so if you know or have relationships with folks that are in the media or that are in organizations that are interested in bringing profile to something like this, we're looking for opportunities to get the word out about OhioCheckbook.com, because we want to drive as much traffic there as possible so people use it, and people use it to hold public officials accountable. Since the launch in December, we've had over 160,000 searches, which is good. But I want to double and triple and quadruple it as soon as possible. And so the more eyeballs we can get on the website and the more people we can get driven there, I believe, more limited in size and scope we can make our state government and ultimately local government as well. So listen, I appreciate everyone having me in today. I appreciate Mike and Senator DeMint and everyone at Heritage opening the podium to me, and appreciate what everyone at the organization does on a day-to-day basis to hold public officials accountable and advance conservative thought. Thank you very much.